The Jews at that peace conference, when they were cutting up Germany and parceling out Europe to all these nations that claimed a right to a certain part of European territory, the Jews said, how about Palestine for us? And they produced, for the first time, to the knowledge of Germans, this Balfour Declaration. So the Germans, for the first time, realized, oh, that was the game. That's why the United States came into the war. And the Germans, for the first time, realized that they were defeated. They suffered this terrific reparations that was slapped onto them because the Zionists wanted Palestine, and they were determined to get it at any cost. Now that brings us up to another very interesting point. When the Germans realized this, they naturally resented it. Up to that time, the Jews had never been better off in any country in the world than they had been in Germany. You had Mr. Rathenau there, who was maybe 100 times as important in industry and finance as Bernard Baruch in this country. You had Mr. Berlin, who owned the two big steamship lines, the North German Lloyd and the Hamburg American line, thank you. You had Mr. Bleichschroeder, who was the banker for the Hohenzollern family. You had the Warburgs in Hamburg, who were the big merchant bankers, the biggest in the world. The Jews were doing very well in Germany. No question about that. Now, the Germans felt, well, that was quite a sellout. It was a sellout that I can best compare. Suppose the United States was at war today with the Soviet Union, and we were winning, and we told the Soviet Union, well, let's quit. We offer you peace terms. Let's forget the whole thing. And all of a sudden, Red China came into the war as an ally of the Soviet Union, and throwing them into the war brought about our defeat, a crushing defeat, with a reparations the likes of which man's imagination cannot encompass. Imagine, then, after that defeat, if we found out that it was the Chinese in this country, our Chinese citizens, who all the time we thought they were loyal citizens working with us, were selling us out to the Soviet Union, and it was through them that Red China was brought into the war against us. How would we feel in the United States against Chinese? I don't think one of them would dare show his face on any street. There wouldn't be lampposts enough convenient to take care of them. Imagine how we would feel. Well, that's how the Germans felt towards these Jews. We've been so nice to them, and from 1905 on, when the first communist revolution in Russia failed, and the Jews had to scramble out of Russia, they all went to Germany, and Germany gave them refuge, and they were treated very nicely. And here, they sold Germany down the river for no reason at all, other than they wanted Palestine as a so-called Jewish commonwealth. Now, Nahum, Sokolow, all the great leaders, the big names that you read about in connection with Zionism today, they, in 1919, 1920, 21, 22, and 23, they wrote in all their papers, and the press was filled with their statements, that the feeling against the Jews in Germany is due to the fact that they realized that this great defeat was brought about by our intercession and bringing the United States into the war against them. The Jews themselves admitted that. It wasn't that the Germans in 1919 discovered that a glass of Jewish blood tasted better than Coca-Cola or Münchner beer. There was no religious feeling. There was no sentiment against those people merely on account of their religious belief. It was all political. It was economic. It was anything but religious. Nobody cared in Germany whether a Jew went home and pulled down the shades and said Shema Yisrael or Our Father. No one cared in Germany any more than they do in the United States. Now, this feeling that developed later in Germany was due to one thing, that the Germans held the Jews responsible for their crushing defeat for no reason at all, because World War I was started against Germany for no reason for which they were responsible. They were guilty of nothing, only of being successful. They built up a big navy, they built up world trade. You must remember, Germany, at the time of Napoleon, at the time of the French Revolution, what was the German Reich consisted of 300 small city-state principalities, dukedoms, and so forth. 300 little separate political entities. And between that time, between the period between Napoleon and Bismarck, they were consolidated into one state. And within 50 years after that time, they became one of the world's great powers. Their navy was rivaling Great Britain. They were doing business all over the world. They could undersell anybody and make better products. And what happened? What happened as a result of that? There was a conspiracy between England, France, and Russia that we must slap down Germany, because there isn't one historian in the world that can find a valid reason why those three countries decided to wipe Germany off the map politically. Now, what happened after that? When Germany realized that the Jews were responsible for her defeat, they naturally resented it. But not a hair on the head of any Jew was harmed. Not a single hair. Professor Tanzel of Georgetown University, who had access to all the secret papers of the State Department, wrote in his book and quoted from a State Department document written by Hugo Schoenfeld, a Jew who Cordell Hull sent to Europe in 1933 to investigate the so-called camps of political prisoners. And he wrote back that he found them in very fine condition. They were in excellent shape. Everybody treated well, and they were filled with communists. Well, a lot of them were Jews, because the Jews happened to be maybe 98% of the communists in Europe at that time. And there were some priests there, and ministers, labor leaders, Masons, and others who had international affiliations. Now, the Jews sort of tried to keep the lid on this fact. They didn't want the world to really understand that they had sold out Germany and that the Germans resented that. So they did take appropriate action against them. They, shall I say, discriminated against them wherever they could. They shunned them, the same as we would the Chinese or the Negroes or the Catholics or anyone in this country that sold us out to an enemy and brought about our defeat. Now, after a while, the Jews of the world didn't know what to do, so they called a meeting in Amsterdam. Jews from every country in the world attended in July 1933. And they said to Germany, you fire Hitler and you put every Jew back into his former position, whether he was a communist, no matter what he was. You can't treat us that way. And we, the Jews of the world, are calling upon you and serving this ultimatum upon you. Well, the Germans told them, you can imagine. So what did they do? In 1917, the communists took over Germany for a few days. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht and a group of Jews in Germany took over the government for 3 days. In fact, when the Kaiser ended the war, he fled to Holland because he thought the communists were going to take over Germany as they did Russia, and that he was going to meet the same fate that the Tsar did in Russia. So he left and went to Holland for safety and for security. Now, at that